Let's talk about the history of the civil rights movement here in the U.S. and a lesson on that history that helps to inform my views on the current push by the Missouri GOP to limit teaching of that history. Okay, so you've probably heard about this theory going around from far-right extremists and folks like Tucker Carlson called the Great Replacement, where effectively it says that there is a coordinated effort to replace white people with members of minority communities for political gains. Even our Senate candidate Eric Schmidt has gotten in on the fun here. He has said that Democrats are fundamentally trying to change this country through illegal immigration. Now, let's check out David Pepper, author of Laboratories of Autocracy, who discusses this and the dangers of censoring the historical context around this issue.
All of this ties back to a long arc of American history, including the recent efforts to censor that history. I want to talk about that today. So replacement theory is nothing but the most recent iteration of something we've had our entire national history, which is white supremacy, and particularly a fierce white backlash every time there are moments in our democracy that are bringing more people in, particularly African Americans, into a more full, inclusive democracy. You know, after they got rid of the property requirement for voting, for example, in the early 1800s, northern states immediately began to add racial bans on voting because of the fear that blacks would start voting. After the Civil War, those amendments and blacks began voting and registering big numbers in the South, that led to violence, voter suppression, and almost a century of Jim Crow. Civil rights laws led to the Southern strategy, same effort to claw back. And the Obama coalition getting its way in 2008 and beyond led to immediate, not just birtherism, but post-Obama voter suppression, again, based on things like myths of voter fraud. So we have this very clear history, and replacement theory is one other iteration of this non-stop, consistent white backlash whenever our democracy looks to becoming more inclusive, including particularly black voters.
Just to jump in, he is using the African American civil rights movement because it is the most prescient example here. But every major civil rights push has been met with backlash. See, the same is true with the LGBT community as an example. The recent win on gay marriage rights has been met with targeting of the trans community at the vanguard, but also the broader LGBT community through things like characterization of them as groomers and stuff like the Florida Don't Say Gay bill and Missouri copycat legislation of that. Okay.
Here's where the censorship comes in, and this is where I so worry about the censorship. If you censor all that out, which is the point of the censorship, you have this illusion that it's been sort of nonstop progress, as opposed to progress always met with pushback. So you blind people to the reality that it's always been a back and forth, but you also blind people to the reality of it's the same tools of myths and disinformation, gerrymandering and suppression and violence that have always been the way in which the pushback has been advanced. We have to fight voter suppression, we have to fight white supremacy, but we also have to teach our full history so we're prepared for its worst elements.
Right, so if you don't think that this attempt at censorship is happening right here, right now in Missouri, you're mistaken. From things like book banning to specific legislation like HB 1474 or HJR 110, which I've already covered, there's like 5 others that I could find. And heck, there's a specific example of Ben Baker offering an amendment that would remove the requirement for schools to teach the Civil Rights Amendment. So when we look back at the history of this coordinated effort by the Missouri GOP, which side do you want to be on?